Mental capacity assessments are rarely straightforward. Even experienced professionals get them wrong. And as someone who's regularly asked by courts and solicitors to review assessments, I can tell you this: the same mistakes come up time and time again. Now, often the outcome might be right, but the reasoning behind it isn't clear enough. And this makes the assessment vulnerable to challenge. So today I want to talk through 3 common mistakes that I see in mental capacity assessments, and more importantly, how to avoid them. Now, the first mistake I want to talk about is not identifying the correct type of decision. What do I mean by this? Well, probably the most common mistake is a failure to ask this very basic question at the start. Is this a one-off decision or an ongoing decision? In other words, is it what we call a micro decision or a macro decision? Now, in 2012, a judge in ABC versus XYZ said that, look, we have 2 different types of decisions. We have macro or ongoing decisions or micro one-off decisions. And the judge explained that macro decisions, was like health and welfare, property and finance, are ongoing because just because I pay a bill today doesn't mean that the broader decision's finished, right? I might need to pay a bill next week. I might need to take out a loan. And he contrasted these macro ongoing decisions with one-off decisions, things like making a will, deciding what to have for breakfast. In these sorts of decisions, once I've signed the will, once I've had my breakfast, it's done. There's nothing more that's needed. Whether it's a micro or macro affects how we gather information. A micro decision can be a snapshot. At the time they signed their will, did they have capacity? But a macro decision is a broader ongoing one, and the snapshot alone isn't sufficient. And what we need to do is we need to consider on the balance of probabilities over an extended period of time, will they meet that criteria or not. I recently worked on a case with an older woman with a long-standing psychosis and memory impairments. Now, in short-term interviews, she could appear coherent for maybe 30 minutes and could give some kind of superficially plausible answers. But outside the interview room, outside this half-an-hour snapshot, she repeatedly forgot information around care. She had these delusional beliefs. Staff were concerned that if she left, she wouldn't be able to find a way back. And the mistake that I saw with this assessment was that actually assessors were treating this as a snapshot decision. Rather than recognising that it's an ongoing decision that requires a more longitudinal view, they were taking that snapshot. So how do we avoid this? Well, the first thing we need to do is carefully define at the start, is this an ongoing or is this a one-off? Ask yourself, does this require consistent management over time, or is it just once they've made this decision, signed the bit, is it done? Mistake 2 is about taking statements at their superficial level. In other words, not digging deep enough. Too often I see reports where assessors accept a confidence-sounding statement without actual proof of understanding. For example, I know there are risks. Problems can come up in any situation. I mean, that sounds good, but unless you explore what the person actually means, it tells you very little. People being assessed will often say what they think we want to hear. A stock phrase, a general comment, does not actually equal comprehension. Now, how do we avoid this? Well, we do that by being curious. Use follow-up questions. For example, in that case about risk, you'd be saying, well, what risks are you thinking of? What would you do if that happened? Can you explain that in your own words? Cross-check what you're being told against records, against history, against their observed behaviour. And digging deeper not only strengthens your evidence, but it shows a genuine respect for the person you're assessing. Mistake number 3 is not linking your conclusions to the threshold of understanding. Now, this often happens at the very end of the assessment. The assessors have gathered lots of good evidence and then they rush the conclusion. I regularly see conclusions like, P lacks capacity because she has dementia. Well, that's not a capacity conclusion, that's a diagnostic statement, right? If the conclusion doesn't clearly link the evidence to the threshold of understanding and mental capacity act criteria, it becomes hard to defend it. The reader of your report should never be left thinking, well, how exactly did the assessor reach that decision? So how do we avoid this? Well, we use a clear, structured conclusion. We set out what the relevant information was, so this threshold of understanding. We identify how the person did or didn't understand it, whether they could or couldn't retain, use, weigh up and communicate the relevant information. Ask yourself, If somebody who wasn't there reads my report, will they follow my reasoning? If the answer is yes, great, solid ground. But if the answer is no, then you need to reinforce that. So mental capacity assessments are complex, and none of us get it right every time. But by identifying the correct decision type, by digging beneath the surface level answers, and by clearly linking our conclusions to the threshold of understanding, we can make sure that our assessments are dramatically improved in terms of quality and defensibility. None of us are perfect, but whether we choose to improve is up to us. And often it's those extra small steps, one question, one more check, one more sentence of explanation, that make all the difference. Well, look, I hope that's been useful. If so, please do like, subscribe and share. And I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Thanks very much.